to the investigation game where we equip you with tools to decipher evidence and to find money. I'm your host, Leah Wietholter, and today I'm joined by our Workman Forensics case manager, Lydia Johnson. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
So Lydia and I actually go way back. Gosh, we've probably been friends for like 12 years-ish, more.
Probably.
Yeah.
Back to college days.
I know. So we're both ORU grads. And that's kind of become a theme here lately at Workman. Not intentional, but great people. And so you have a degree in finance from ORU. And then you worked in for a large public accounting firm in auditing for several years. Yeah. And then you went to a local, here in Tulsa, publicly traded energy company and worked in accounting. What was your role there?
I was in corporate accounting and helped provide reports to management. I filled in financial reporting and a bunch of different areas, basically.
Yeah.
So I got to see a lot of different areas and roles, and was there about 8 years, I think.
Wow, that's awesome. And then you taught at Tulsa Community College for a little bit.
After I had my daughter. Wanted to kind of take a step back, do some part-time stuff, and that was a good fit for a couple of years, and an adjunct instructor for accounting.
Yeah. So very, very knowledgeable background in accounting for sure. And then it's been about 3.5 years, and kind of during that time you were teaching, that you started working here at Workman as well, helping us with analysis. And Lydia has some of the prettiest work papers of anybody who's ever worked here, I think.
Thanks to my auditing days.
Yeah, but to then just being able to communicate, which is actually what kind of led into your role now as our case manager, where you handle all client communication. So once a client comes on board with Workman, they, maybe talk to me for a little bit, talk to a client services rep, and then they get to talk to you and work with you. And so because of that, I asked you to join us today because I wanted to talk about what does somebody do, what do our listeners do whenever they get a case and it's dealing with financial information? Like, where do they even start? They have a case. Where are they going to start? Financial information can seem so overwhelming. And yet I feel like at Workman, we've done a really nice job over the last 8.5 years of just honing in on what is most important and what's the most valuable piece of information without getting carried away by all the drama.
Right.
So because you get that from the clients first, that's why I wanted you to kind of be here and talk about it.
And just take a step back before we dig into the details. A business can have amazing infrastructure and state-of-the-art equipment, and if their data is bad, though, it's going to lead to poor decision making. And so in that same vein, what we do at Forensic Accounting, data is foundation.
Right.
And data tells the story.
Yeah.
So because of that, and in just the nature of being in accounting, and we always want to be objective, but we always want to use best evidence as well. So that's why this podcast is so important, and that's why this first step in the investigation is so important, is because this is all evidence, but we want best evidence to be able to be the foundation for our case.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I agree. So then what are some of the first things that you ask for whenever a client's told you, here are all of our issues, they've completed kind of their concerns questionnaire for us, and then 9 times out of 10, what do we end up asking for? Honestly, 10 times out of 10, what do we end up asking for?
Bank statements.
Credit
card statements.
Yep.
If they have investment accounts, brokerage accounts, what is the common denominator between all these is it's third party. They're from an independent third party source. And so the reason that's so important is because, it seems common sense, but you'd be surprised at how many people don't think this through, but it can't be changed, right?
Right.
And whereas accounting systems, their information that they provide, that they do in their own accounting department, that stuff can be tweaked and changed. So we want to focus initially on what are the best third-party independent sources.
Yeah. So what are some of our favorite things to find out of bank statements? Do you have any?
Well, we always hone in on transfers for sure.
Yeah.
Apart from the actual transfer, it, identifies unknown accounts. It identifies, what we need to zero in on if there's any suspicious activity. I don't know. You probably can add in on this.
Yeah, I love transfers. I trying to find those connected accounts, or even just looking at and we'll cover this a little bit, some of the analysis part with Felix in our next episode, but just really looking at check payees and just where is money going, who's getting paid. And a lot of times either those checks or transfers or even wires are some of my favorite, those wires that will lead us to other bank accounts.
Right.
I think I should tell a story here. When I was working, this is pre-Workman Forensics, but when I was working in forensic accounting for law enforcement, there was a case I was working that I'm entering all of these bank statements. I mean, it was a box. This box was so big of bank statements. And this is my version of, walking to school both ways uphill in the snow. Like, because this was pre-software that would help digitize all these bank statements. And
you put in the work.
I did. And that was the intern's job, to digitize all of this. So this was a really big pump and dump stock scheme. And so I was asked to schedule all of these statements. And I remember whenever I first started doing this back in, at the very beginning of my internship, I thought, this is awful. But then I started realizing I probably know more of the story than the investigator at this point, other than interviews, but just by looking at where's their money going. Mm-hmm. And so this bank statement identified a wire transfer. And this wire transfer ended in an even dollar amount. And it was over $400,000 in one transaction, and it was wired to a bank in Belize. And the super
ding,
cool,
ding, 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 ding.
Right, red flag. And okay, so this was in my intern day, so I was pretty young, just hadn't been many places, but since it went to Belize, my best friend in high school had gone on a vacation to Belize, so I knew it was a foreign country. And so I went and I Googled, found the bank, and then let the analyst know, hey, this is where this money went. Well, anyway, fast forward a few months. I mean, it was quite a while, and I ended up, all of a sudden, the intern has a phone call from the SEC in Washington, D.C., and they're asking me, how did you find this? This is a bank account we didn't know about. How did you find this? And I'm like, I was entering bank statements.
Yeah.
And they're like, yeah, but what's the story behind it? I was literally just inputting transactions into an Excel spreadsheet. And then we found it. But that's one of my favorite things to do. And in a lot of our cases, especially divorce cases, I think that's where we find a whole lot of unknown accounts through looking at bank statements.
It seems so simple and foundational, but it tells, the bank statement for most people, you can find out what's going on. It tells the story, right?
Right.
So that's why we start there.
Yeah.
I think that made me think of a case we had a couple years ago. It was a partnership case, and the partner controlled the books. And if we had only been looking at their QuickBooks, kind of their accounting system, transactions, and how they recorded it there, we would have completely missed what was going on.
Right.
And he ended up profiting, was it over $1 million?
Yeah, over $1 million.
And so we didn't find that until we started looking at payroll records and bank statements, credit card statements.
Right.
And that's something else, I think we've seen quite a few times is an employee will, if there's no oversight and they have access to the bank account and or credit card account, they can set up, the company pays their utilities. They have the same utility company. And you're not going to see that in their QuickBooks. That's all going to be, just normal. We have electric, gas. Company has to pay that on a regular basis. And, it's not until you get into the bank statements where you see there's 4 payments to this utilities company. And that should be only bi-monthly or that should be only monthly. And you look into it, you're like, okay, well, the company's been paying this employee's utilities for the past, year or two.
Right.
So little things like that you're never going to find in their journal entries or in their financial statements, you will find in the bank statements or credit card statements.
Right. And in the case that you're talking about, that partnership dispute, if I think what's super telling about it is that since the partner controlled everything, if we had relied only on that accounting system, it actually would have looked like our client had benefited more than the other partner.
Oh, yes, true.
Which I think is just a perfect example of why we don't want to rely on something that someone can actually control, alter, or even, maybe not even intentionally, but just anytime you have an accounting system, somebody could just make a mistake. Mm-hmm. And there could be errors and so forth. And so using those supporting documents. And then, you know, I don't, we don't really talk about this, but, you know, I think one of the most surprising things to people who come work here, whenever we start working a case, is that the accounting records aren't reconciled.
Yeah. Especially
that was a big shock, right?
Yeah, for sure. Especially, you know, a lot of my experience was working for when I went as an auditor, I was auditing Fortune 500 company, and then when I went to work for the energy company, you know, we were publicly traded, so you have to do things a certain way. You dot your I's, cross your T's.
Right.
You know, you're accountable to shareholders, and so like the things that were just basic 101 accounting, you just always do this. A lot of small businesses, they don't. And so,
or they don't even know that their employee's not reconciling. So, you know, somebody listening might be thinking, well, how in the world would it be that this partner in this partnership dispute would have benefited $1 million, but in the books it made it look like the other person benefited? They weren't reconciled.
Yeah.
Well, and there were just completely bogus entries. But yeah. And then one other thought that just came to me about that too is that I think a lot of times accountants kind of get wrapped up in what's in the accounting ledger and what and how wrong it is from a GAAP or, you know, just best practice standpoint. Like, oh my goodness, I can't believe they recorded this as this. But nobody ever, you know, no one can go cash a journal entry at the bank, right?
And
they've got to steal cash.
And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the stuff that goes under the radar.
Right. So I like to
books.
think that the cash is stolen from the bank account, which is why we look at the bank statements. The accounting records often tell us the story, and they lend, not that we're here to prove intent, but they usually lend to that intent side of fraud more so than, you know, but that's not actually what's missing.
Right.
The accounting record doesn't.
Yeah, and because, you know, just the caveat or the wanting to make this known too is we definitely want to look at their accounting records. We'll use financial statements. We'll use you know, some of the tax records. One of the things we always request usually is, you know, the filings or tax records. And so that does provide helpful information. It's just not usually the first thing we ask for, the most independent source. If they have a third-party CPA that, you know, there's no suspicious activity, we're not expecting any foul play or wrongdoing on their part, then absolutely we'll kind of take his information or what he's prepared and use it.
Right.
But we don't usually start there.
No. Right. So what are anything else that you kind of want to talk about that we just look at first? So we request from the clients bank statements, credit card statements, brokerage account statements, and payroll. Yeah. And then accounting records, if that's fitting for that case. But what are some of the other things that we just do
a good place for
internally?
us to start, just to get to know our you know, the parties involved, is we'll do, you know, investigative research, whether that is reports, but one place specifically is a good resource is the Secretary of State. You know, it's easy, you can go online, it's free, just to go look, search for this specific individual, search for, and that often is a place where it can identify, are there, you know, does one party have additional companies or LLCs?
Right.
You know, and that is not going to be any concrete, you know, necessarily huge. It might not be a huge find, but it helps us know we need to ask this question, or we need to try to obtain some documents to find out more information about this LLC, you know.
Right.
Or is this LLC, were these LLCs ever paid, was their money ever going to these LLCs from bank accounts? And so it kind of helps us know what to be looking at. It gives us big picture idea.
Yeah. So just in case there's someone who doesn't know what the Secretary of State is, and in Oklahoma we call it the Secretary of State. I think the same function is in every state, but
yes.
For us it's called the Oklahoma Secretary of State, and that's where you go to file for LLCs,
LLCs,
corporations,
right.
Or even trade names, like doing business as trade names. And so it allows you to search by the registered agent and get some information on who owns these LLCs.
Right.
Yeah.
And in that kind of same vein, another one would be the county assessor. So we
Right.
can go there and look for property records for some of the specific parties involved, and that also just helps us. One of the things we like to do is keep track of assets as we are getting information. Identify assets that are involved in this investigation. So that could be a good place to kind of hone in on some of those assets.
Yeah, exactly. And just keeping track of those and who's paying for those assets, when did they originate, whose name are they in, does that make sense that they're just in one party's name, should they be in two, maybe in a divorce situation. So,
and not some of the listeners might not have these tools, but because of our business, we have a couple private investigators on our team, and then that also gives us access to some other resources and ways to find information on either assets or people that can also be used in the investigation. Yeah, which I think we'll probably have a podcast about that down the road.
Yes, we will. Yeah, our newest PI is going to sit in on that one with me.
Be fun.
So I'm excited. So do you also, I'm kind of going to put you on the spot here, but do you have a favorite case that we've worked?
Oh, goodness. You're putting me on the spot.
Yeah, I know.
I think embezzlement, just in general, embezzlements are my favorite. Just the nature of the transfers, finding information. I love big picture, so it's fun for me, even though I'm not doing a lot of the analysis work anymore. I love being part of those initial conversations with clients and meetings, and then helping our team keep the big picture of what's going on as well and not get lost in the details. And I think embezzlements are just fun.
Yeah, the stories are always just great behind embezzlements. And that is the fun part, I think, of your role. Getting to, you kind of gather all that information up front. And
so in my mind, I can start creating my own ideas in my head, and then it's fun to see what plays out as, oh, that really happened, or no, that didn't really happen.
Right.
But
yeah, it is
just to get an idea.
Yeah.
From the get-go.
It is interesting. On any case, it could be divorce or embezzlement. I kind of feel like one is an individual, one's a company, but I feel like they kind of follow the same pattern. And you start out with this big story where, well, if they did this, then they must have done this. And then if they did this, then they must have done that. And so then by the end, we get by relying on third-party information and doing our data analysis, we can then kind of sort what was actually true and can be proven versus kind of what's hyperbole and just started kind of growing in the client's mind.
Which, on the other side of the spectrum, that's probably my least favorite part of the job is when clients think that, they're missing $500,000, and then you go through and, you hear their stories, like you're right there with them, want to support them, but data tells a story. Right. And then you give them, findings, and then it was only $50,000, and they're just devastated because in their mind it was way more.
Right. But at the same time, aren't they kind of happy they don't have a $500,000 loss?
They should be.
That's usually my thought. Oh, yay, you didn't lose as much money as you thought you did. But anyway.
So it's just unmet expectations.
Right. Right. So, any other questions or cases?
I think we're focusing a lot on, especially because we're forensic accounting, it seems like, well, we're always dealing with money or numbers. And of course, yes, numbers are usually always involved, but that doesn't always mean that all the data is going to be related to money.
That's true.
Think of one of the cases in the past, which you can probably shed more light on, but where GPS tracking was crucial for us to be able to connect the dots in order to then make more sense of what happened to the money. But without that GPS tracking, we wouldn't have been able to rely on best evidence, or it would have been, we suspect this, but we can't prove it. So, but because of GPS tracking, it was more reliable. Can you kind of?
Yeah, that one. I love this case. I love lots of cases. But yeah, this case was a retail business. And so they had point of sale at their store, but then they would also travel and do kind of trade shows. And the individual running the store, she kind of ran the store, and then she'd also go do these trade shows. She set up a Square account, and so that they could take credit card payments at any location. And when she set it up, which, great idea, owner loves this idea.
Right.
And whenever she sets it up where the money's going to dump into her personal bank account. That's a problem. And so, right. And then I think she had also created, it was suspected that she would also say that she was using this Square account for like a side business that they were also running. Okay. And so we needed to be able to distinguish, it would have been one thing to say. What was personal, what was... Yeah, like how do we determine between these two payments being taken with the same Square account, dumping into the personal bank account where some of it was personal and some of it belonged to my client. And so we were able to use, just if you want to know, Square, if you subpoena records or ask them for exports from your account, it will list the GPS location.
Which is crucial.
Yeah, so crucial. And so we were able to look at where were these transactions taking place, and some of them were taking place actually in the retail store, and then some of them were taking place at trade shows, and then some of them were taking place at like individual homes, and so then that made sense, like they weren't selling these retail products at people's homes. So, right. That one was a great case. I love GPS data analysis. Yeah. I love it. And I love that that's available to us now. Mm-hmm. So,
and just for the listeners, just something to be thinking about that may,
right.
Or even I think of some small businesses we've had that have trucking companies.
Yes.
How important it is, the difference between working cases with like those companies that their trucks have GPS tracking.
Yes.
And the ones that don't, and how you can find out so much more information, if you have that technology.
Right.
Which is, these days, it's cheap and easy to get.
Yeah, and it's definitely worth it. We've had people talk to us about inventory going missing, but they only had GPS on some vehicles and not on others, and so how do you back into that? Mm-hmm. Which we can be pretty creative about how to solve that problem, but I do love that data source.
For sure.
But just kind of as a recap, if someone is dealing with their very first case and they don't know where to start, we just recommend defining a period of time that you're going to look at. Mm-hmm. So we don't like to leave it open-ended. Mm-hmm. We like to, ask the client, what period of time would you like for us to look at? Because obviously that's going to impact the cost to the client.
Right.
And then we want bank statements of every account that they know for that relevant period. We want credit card statements that would have been paid out of those bank statements. Mm-hmm. Payroll records.
Specifically of the third party.
Right.
Initially, right.
Right. And you want to make sure that they're third party mm-hmm. because I had a case several years ago where this lady she was stealing cash out of deposits and she was altering the bank reconciliations. And she started off kind of at the beginning of the scheme. She started off by altering the bank statements. And so she'd get a copy in the mail and then she'd shred that one and she'd download a copy and then alter it in Adobe or something similar, and then print it out. And I was actually going through paper records and I thought, these feel different. And I think this particular bank punched holes in theirs, and so this didn't have holes punched. There were just a few
mm-hmm.
details that were off, and so I went and compared the ending and beginning balances of the month before and the month after, and she had altered them. So people just making sure that you get it directly from the bank,
yes,
or and then also, just because there's technology out there to digitize these statements now, downloading those bank statements or credit card statements as PDFs or export it to Excel mm-hmm. so that that'll just, that whole process of digitizing
right.
will go a lot faster. And then payroll records, and then if applicable, accounting records. Mm-hmm. You can pretty much just start with that and then start adding evidence.
And then back, just one comment on the relevant period. If you're looking at a large time span, whether it's 10 years or, even 8 years could be a lot, mm-hmm. take a lot of time. We recommend, and we do a lot with clients, is let's focus in on the last 2 or 3 years.
Oh yeah, good point.
Because usually if people are stealing money, it starts out small, and the trend is it gets a bit larger every month. So then you can at least figure out what's happening. The bulk of the money probably is going to have happened in the last few years.
That's right.
And then, that I think keeps you from, first of all, being inefficient, spending lots of time, and going down kind of rabbit trails that maybe you would miss had you just focused on the last few years.
Yeah, that's a great point. Look at all these tips and tricks we're providing. Believe me, these have been learned over a very long
Yes.
time and lots of cases with us.
And who said data can't be fun?
Oh yeah, data is so much fun. Data is fun. I think we say that maybe more than anything. Well, that and you just never need to underestimate that no matter what rules or policies or procedures or accounting principles exist, people just do whatever they want.
Yeah.
And so you just can't discount that. You can say, oh my gosh, well, you can't do that. You probably can. And it's probably done.
And even if you have the best of controls in place, I mean, what, you know,
Oh my goodness.
people can still go around that. You know.
Yeah, the collusion.
Right.
So, well, thanks for being on the podcast.
Yeah,
Lydia.
it's fun.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here. And I'm sure you'll be back to tell us more stories. But thanks so much for listening today, and we hope you'll tune in next time.